The blood of 3 men stained Samuel Xanders' hands as he rode through the vast Montana wilderness of 1878. His weathered face turned against the biting autumn wind that carried whispers of the approaching winter. The wounds that truly plagued him weren't the ones visible beneath his tattered clothing, but the ones carved deep into his soul, wounds that no doctor could treat with needle and thread. Samuel guided his loyal Palomino stallion, Rusty, along a narrow ridge overlooking the sprawling valley below. The morning mist still clung to the pines like gossamer veils, and in the distance, he could make out the faint outlines of Silver Creek, a growing settlement he'd deliberately avoided for nearly 2 years now. The town represented everything he'd left behind: community, comfort, human connection, things a man with his past had no right to claim. His right shoulder throbbed beneath his duster, a fresh bullet wound from his latest encounter with the Blackwell gang. He'd been tracking them for months, ever since they'd raided the Hanson homestead in the Eastern Territory. The newspapers called it a robbery gone wrong. Samuel knew better. He'd seen the aftermath, arrived just hours too late to prevent the slaughter of a good family whose only crime had been working land that Jedediah Blackwell coveted. "Just a little farther, boy," he murmured to Rusty, who tossed his head in response, steam billowing from his nostrils in the cold air. "We'll find somewhere to rest up." Samuel had managed to take down 3 of Blackwell's men in a surprise ambush 2 days prior, but not before one of them had gotten a lucky shot. Now infection was setting in, his skin burning with fever beneath his filthy clothes. He needed shelter, supplies, and time to heal, all things in short supply for a man who traveled as he did. As the sun climbed higher, Samuel spotted what he was looking for: an abandoned trapper's cabin tucked into a stand of aspens. He'd used it once before, during a particularly harsh winter 3 years back. The structure looked much as he remembered: weathered log walls, a sagging porch, and a stone chimney that promised the possibility of warmth. He dismounted with a grunt of pain, nearly collapsing as his boots hit the ground. Rusty nickered softly, nudging Samuel's good shoulder as if encouraging him to keep going. The loyal beast had been with him through worse, though not by much. I know," Samuel whispered, patting the horse's neck. "I'm not finished yet." The cabin's interior was dusty but intact. A small iron stove stood in one corner, a rickety table and chair in another. A narrow cot remained against the far wall, its straw mattress likely home to mice and other creatures seeking shelter from the elements. It wasn't much, but it would do. Samuel tended to Rusty first, removing his saddle and bridle, giving him water from a nearby stream, and ensuring he had enough grazing area within sight of the cabin. Only then did he allow himself to address his own needs, collapsing onto the cot with a bottle of whiskey and his meager medical supplies. The bullet had gone clean through, which was a small mercy, but the wound was angry and hot to the touch. He poured whiskey over it, biting down on his belt to keep from screaming as liquid fire seared through his flesh. With trembling hands, he packed the wound with the last of his willow bark and bandaged it as best he could. When the task was complete, Samuel took a long pull from the bottle and closed his eyes. Sleep came in fitful bursts, haunted by the faces of those he'd failed to save and those whose lives he'd taken in retribution. In his dreams, he heard Blackwell's mocking laughter and saw the burning homesteads that marked his path across the territory. By morning, Samuel's fever had worsened. He drifted in and out of consciousness, barely able to drag himself to the stream for water. The world tilted and swam before his eyes, colors too bright, shadows too deep. He knew with grim certainty that without help, he wouldn't last much longer. The irony wasn't lost on him to survive countless gunfights only to die alone from infection in an abandoned cabin. It was on the 3rd day, as Samuel lay delirious on the cot, that he heard the sound of approaching hoofbeats. His hand instinctively moved to his revolver, though he doubted he had the strength to aim properly. The door creaked open, sending a shaft of sunlight across the dusty floorboards. Samuel squinted against the brightness, struggling to make out the silhouette framed in the doorway. "My God," came a woman's voice, soft but steady. "You're in a bad way, aren't you?" Through fever-clouded eyes, Samuel saw her approach a woman with copper-colored hair pulled back in a practical braid, wearing a riding skirt and jacket. Her face came into focus as she knelt beside the cot, striking rather than conventionally beautiful, with intelligent hazel eyes that assessed his condition with a clinical detachment. "Don't come any closer," Samuel warned, his voice a harsh rasp. "I'm not fit company for anyone, especially a lady." The woman ignored him, pressing a cool hand to his forehead. "You're burning up. That wound's infected." She glanced at his poorly bandaged shoulder. "I'm Faith Harrington, the new doctor in Silver Creek, and you are—" Samuel tried to laugh, but it came out as a pained cough. "A doctor out here." "Yes, a doctor, and you still haven't told me your name." She was already opening a leather satchel, removing bottles and bandages with practiced efficiency. "Samuel," he conceded finally. "Samuel Xanders." Recognition flickered across her face. "The bounty hunter." "The one they call the Silver Creek Shadow." He closed his eyes, too exhausted to deny it. "Just a man making his way." "A man dying of infection," she corrected, cutting away his filthy bandage. "This needs proper cleaning and stitching." Samuel tried to push her hands away. "Why are you here?" "This cabin's been abandoned for years." Faith continued her examination, unmoved by his resistance. "I was gathering herbs. There's a patch of echinacea that grows near the stream. I saw smoke from your chimney." She wrinkled her nose. "Though I'd hardly call that pitiful wisp a proper fire." "When's the last time you ate?" Samuel couldn't remember. "Days, maybe," Faith sighed, reaching for a bottle in her bag. "This is going to hurt, Mr. Xanders, but it needs doing." Before he could protest, she was cleansing his wound with an astringent solution that made his previous whiskey treatment feel like a gentle caress. Samuel gritted his teeth, fighting to remain conscious as she worked. "You've been tracking the Blackwell gang," she said as she prepared to stitch the wound. It wasn't a question. Samuel's eyes snapped open. "What do you know about that?" "Everyone in Silver Creek knows. 3 of their men were found dead 2 days' ride from here." Her hands remained steady as she threaded her needle. "Marshall Thompson says it has all the hallmarks of your work." Samuel said nothing, watching her face as she concentrated on her task. There was something unusual about her, a confidence and self-possession rare in frontier women. She couldn't be much past 25, yet she carried herself with the authority of someone twice her age. "Why did you become a doctor?" he asked, partly to distract himself from the pain of her needle, partly out of genuine curiosity. Faith's lips curved in a slight smile. "My father was a surgeon in the war. I assisted him from the time I was 12. After he died, I continued his practice back east." Her expression darkened. "Until I discovered that patients preferred a male doctor with half my skill to a female one with twice the training. So you came west." "People are less particular about credentials when they're bleeding to death on the frontier." She tied off the last stitch with a practiced twist. "Silver Creek needed a doctor. I needed a fresh start." As she worked, applying a poultice of herbs to draw out the infection, Samuel found himself studying her more closely. Her hands were capable but feminine, her movements precise and economical. Despite her professional demeanor, there was a wariness in her eyes that spoke of her own painful past. "You shouldn't be alone out here," he said finally. "It's not safe for a woman." Faith raised an eyebrow. "Says the man I found half dead in an abandoned cabin." She packed her supplies back into her satchel. "I can take care of myself, Mr. Xanders. I've been doing so for quite some time." She stood, brushing dust from her skirt. "I'll be back tomorrow with food and more supplies. Try to drink water and keep that wound clean." She hesitated at the door. "And Mr. Xanders, don't die before I return. I hate losing patients." With that, she was gone, leaving behind the scent of medicinal herbs and a faint trace of lavender. Samuel closed his eyes, uncertain if she had been real or merely a fever dream, but the neat stitches in his shoulder and the fresh bandage suggested she was very real indeed. True to her word, Faith returned the following day, her horse laden with supplies. She brought food, clean bandages, and medicines from her own stores. She rebuilt his pathetic fire into a proper blaze and cooked a hearty stew that was the first real meal Samuel had eaten in days. "Why are you helping me?" he asked as she changed his bandage, noting with approval that the angry red streaks around his wound had begun to recede. Faith considered the question. "Because you need help," she said simply. "And because I took an oath to heal, not to judge who deserves healing." "Even a killer," her eyes met his, unflinching. "Is that what you are, Mr. Xanders, just a killer?" Samuel looked away. "I hunt men who deserve hunting." "For money, sometimes," he admitted, "more often for other reasons." Faith nodded, as though his vague answer confirmed something she had already suspected. "The Blackwell gang killed someone important to you." It wasn't a question, and Samuel didn't treat it as one. He remained silent as she continued tending his wound, but the tension in his jaw told her she'd struck a nerve. Over the next week, Faith came to the cabin daily, gradually nursing Samuel back to health. Despite his initial resistance, he found himself looking forward to her visits. She brought not only medical care but news from town, books to read, and conversation that forced his mind away from the dark paths it typically traveled. She spoke of her childhood in Pennsylvania, her medical training, and her decision to come west after her father's death. She didn't volunteer information about her mother, and Samuel didn't ask. They both had topics they preferred to avoid. As his strength returned, Samuel began to assist with small tasks around the cabin, rebuilding the stone hearth, patching holes in the roof, reinforcing the rickety porch. Faith watched with bemused interest as the abandoned trapper's shack slowly transformed into something more habitable. "Planning to stay a while?" she asked one afternoon as she helped him hang a door he'd fashioned from salvaged lumber. Samuel paused, realizing he hadn't given much thought to his next move. Normally, he would have been back on Blackwell's trail the moment he could sit a saddle. Now he found himself reluctant to leave. "Just making myself useful while I heal," he said finally. "Seems poor repayment to leave this place worse than I found it." Faith smiled, a rare, full smile that transformed her serious face. A man with a conscience, after all. As autumn deepened toward winter, Samuel's health improved steadily under Faith's care. The infection cleared, and the wound began to knit together properly. His strength returned, along with clarity of mind that had been absent for longer than he cared to admit. It was during one of Faith's visits, as they shared coffee by the fire, that Samuel finally spoke of what had set him on his current path. "I had a wife once," he said quietly, staring into the flames. "Emma, and a son, Thomas. We had a small ranch near the Colorado border." Faith remained silent, giving him space to continue at his own pace. "Blackwell wanted our water rights. When I refused to sell, he sent men to persuade me." Samuel's knuckles whitened around his cup. "I was in town when they came. Emma tried to fight them off with my hunting rifle. He couldn't finish the sentence. "I'm so sorry," Faith said softly, her hand covering his. "Thomas was only 6, Samuel continued, his voice hollow. "When I found them, the house was already burning. I managed to get them out, but it was too late." Faith's fingers tightened around his. "And you've been hunting Blackwell ever since?" Samuel nodded. 3 years. I've whittled down his operation piece by piece. He's running scared now with just a handful of men left. And when you finally catch him, what then?" The question hung in the air between them. Samuel had never allowed himself to think beyond his revenge. "I don't know," he admitted finally. Faith studied his face for a long moment. "You can't bring them back, Samuel, no matter how many men you kill." "You think I don't know that?" His voice was sharp with sudden anger. "You think I believe this will fix anything?" "I think you're punishing yourself as much as you're punishing Blackwell," she replied evenly. "And I think you're tired, bone tired, soul tired." Samuel stood abruptly, moving to the window to stare out at the darkening forest. "You don't understand." Don't I? There was something in her tone that made him turn. Faith's eyes held a familiar pain. My husband was a Union officer. After the war, he couldn't leave the violence behind. He drank, he fought, he did terrible things. She took a shaky breath. One night, he turned that violence on me. I defended myself. He didn't survive. Samuel stared at her in shock. Faith. His family was influential. They would have seen me hang, doctor or not, so I came west, started over. She met his gaze steadily. We all have ghosts, Samuel. The question is whether we let them haunt us forever. That night, after Faith had returned to town, Samuel lay awake thinking about her words. For 3 years, vengeance had been his only purpose, his reason for drawing breath. The thought of letting it go felt like a betrayal of Emma and Thomas. Yet for the first time, he allowed himself to imagine a life beyond his crusade, a life with connections, with purpose beyond death. As winter settled over the mountains, the cabin became a sanctuary of sorts. Faith continued her daily visits, and their relationship evolved from doctor and patient to something deeper. They spoke of books they had read, places they had seen, dreams they had abandoned. Samuel found himself laughing for the first time in years, rediscovering parts of himself he thought had died alongside his family. The first snow came early that year, blanketing the forest in pristine white. Faith arrived at the cabin with frosted eyelashes and pink cheeks, stamping snow from her boots. The pass to Silver Creek will be closed soon if this keeps up, she said, warming her hands by the fire. Samuel nodded, pouring her a cup of coffee. You shouldn't risk the journey in weather like this. It's not safe. Are you concerned for my welfare, Mr. Xanders? She teased, though her eyes were serious. Yes, he said simply, surprising them both with his directness. Faith's smile faded, replaced by something more vulnerable. Samuel. Before she could continue, the sound of approaching horses cut through the quiet afternoon. Samuel moved to the window, his hand automatically reaching for the revolver he kept within reach. 3 riders, he said tersely. Armed, Faith joined him at the window, her body tense. Blackwell's men, can't tell. Samuel checked his weapon. Get behind the stove. If anything happens, I'm not hiding, Faith interrupted, retrieving a small derringer from her medical bag. Remember, I can take care of myself. There was no time to argue. The riders were dismounting, approaching the cabin with the cautious movements of men expecting trouble. Samuel positioned himself beside the door, nodding for Faith to stand clear. When the heavy knock came, he called out, "State your business." "Marshall Thompson, Silver Creek," came the reply. "That you in there, Xanders?" Samuel relaxed slightly but didn't lower his weapon. "What brings you out in this weather, Marshall? Information that might interest you. We're freezing out here. Mind if we come in?" Samuel exchanged a glance with Faith, who nodded. He opened the door, keeping his revolver visible. Marshall Thompson was a weathered man in his 50s, with shrewd eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. With him were 2 deputies, young men who looked uncomfortable under Samuel's scrutiny. "Dr. Harrington," Thompson said, nodding to Faith with evident surprise. "Didn't expect to find you here." "Medical care," she replied smoothly. "Mr. Xanders was injured." Thompson's eyes flicked between them, clearly sensing there was more to the story, but he didn't press. "We've been tracking you for days, Xanders. Got news you need to hear." "I'm listening." "Jedediah Blackwell is dead." The words landed like a physical blow. Samuel stared at the marshal, certain he had misheard. "What?" "Shot dead in a saloon in Willow Springs 3 days ago." Thompson removed his hat, running a hand through his thinning hair. "Not by any lawman, mind you. One of his own men turned on him, fellow named Carson. Apparently there was a disagreement over money." Samuel sank into a chair, his mind struggling to process this news. Blackwell dead. "Not by his hand, but by simple greed and betrayal. We've got Carson in custody," Thompson continued. "He's singing like a canary, naming names, locations. The whole Blackwell operation is falling apart." Faith moved to Samuel's side, her hand resting lightly on his shoulder. "Thank you for bringing this news, Marshal," she said, her eyes never leaving Samuel's face. Thompson nodded, understanding their need for privacy. There's more, Xanders. With Blackwell gone and his men scattered, the bounties are being paid out. You've got money waiting in Silver Creek, quite a substantial sum, given how many of his men you've brought in." After the lawman departed, promising to return when the weather cleared, Samuel sat in silence by the fire. Faith gave him space, busying herself with small tasks around the cabin until finally he spoke. "All this time," he said, his voice barely audible, "all these years hunting him, and in the end it wasn't even me who pulled the trigger." Faith knelt before him, taking his hands in hers. "Does it matter? He's gone. He can't hurt anyone else. It feels empty." Samuel looked at her, confusion and grief warring in his eyes. "What was it all for if not to end him myself? Perhaps it was leading you here," Faith suggested gently. "To this moment. To a crossroads where you can choose something beyond vengeance." Samuel studied her face, seeing in it possibilities he had denied himself for too long. "What would you have me choose, Faith?" "Life," she said simply. "A future. Rest." That word rest pierced through the armor he'd built around his heart. How long had it been since he'd truly rested, not just physical rest, but the deeper peace that comes from laying down one's burdens? "I don't know if I remember how," he admitted. Faith's hands framed his face, her touch infinitely tender. "You can rest now, Samuel," she whispered. "The fight is over." Something broke loose inside him, then a dam of grief and rage and exhaustion he'd held back for 3 long years. Samuel pulled Faith into his arms, burying his face against her shoulder as sobs tore through him. She held him through the storm, her own tears mingling with his, 2 wounded souls finding solace in each other's embrace. When the tempest passed, leaving them both drained but somehow lightened, Samuel looked at Faith with new clarity. "Stay," he said. "Not just today, not just until I'm healed. Stay with me." Faith's smile was radiant despite her tear-stained cheeks. "Is that a proposal, Mr. Xanders?" "The beginning of one," he replied, a tentative smile touching his lips. "I reckon we have some getting to know each other to do first." "I reckon we do," she agreed, leaning forward to press her lips to his in a kiss that promised healing, hope, and a future neither had dared imagine. The winter of 1878 was one of the harshest in Montana memory, but within the walls of the once-abandoned trapper's cabin, Samuel and Faith found warmth that defied the howling blizzards. As snow piled high around their sanctuary, they shared their histories, their fears, and gradually, their dreams. Faith continued her medical practice in Silver Creek once the passes cleared, riding out to the cabin each evening. Samuel used his bounty money to purchase the land surrounding their home, gradually building a small but prosperous ranch. The skills that had made him a formidable tracker and hunter served him well as he learned to raise cattle and horses instead of pursuing men. They were married the following spring in a simple ceremony by the stream where Faith had gathered herbs on the day she found him. Marshal Thompson stood as witness, along with several townsfolk who had come to respect the quiet rancher and their beloved doctor. As years passed, the cabin expanded into a proper home. Children came, first a daughter they named Emma, then twin boys who filled the house with laughter and mischief. Faith maintained her medical practice, teaching Samuel enough skills that they often worked as a team during emergencies. The nightmares never completely vanished for either of them, but they grew less frequent, less intense. On difficult nights, they would hold each other, whispering reassurances until dawn broke over the mountains. Sometimes, travelers passing through would recognize Samuel as the infamous bounty hunter who had once terrorized outlaws throughout the territory. They would look with disbelief at the contented family man before them, unable to reconcile the legends with reality. Faith would simply smile at their confusion. Only she knew the full measure of the transformation, how a man consumed by vengeance had found the courage to choose life instead. How the words she had spoken on that pivotal day, "You can rest now," had changed not only his destiny but hers as well. On the 10th anniversary of their meeting, as they sat on their porch watching the sunset paint the mountains gold, Samuel took Faith's hand in his. "I never thanked you properly," he said. Faith raised an eyebrow. "For what?" "For finding me when I was lost. For showing me there could be something beyond the pain." He brought her hand to his lips. "For teaching me how to rest." Faith leaned her head against his shoulder, their fingers intertwined. "We found each other," she corrected gently. "And we both learned to rest." In the distance, their children's laughter rang out as they chased fireflies in the gathering dusk. The sound drifted across the ranch that had once been an abandoned wilderness, a testament to the healing power of love and the peace that comes when even the most wounded heart finds its home.